my friends, welcome back to another episode of Boozin' on a Budget right here on Titan TV. It's the wine episode! I gotta be honest, I've been putting the wine episode off. Not because I don't have a love for wine, or I don't want to talk about wine, or I don't want to drink wine. There is just so much involved in wine. And that's one of the things that drew me in to really start getting involved with wine is the vast amount of information that you can learn and study when you're figuring out wine. You're going to learn geography, culture, viticulture, climatology, geography. Did I say that already? Once I started digging in to what is all about wine, I started learning all kinds of stuff. So I want to talk about that. Where did it start out? Well, I was always a beer guy, always a whiskey guy. And then I dated this girl and she was a wine person. And so I started drinking wine with her. What I soon realized is I know nothing about wine. I used to have a glass of wine maybe with dinner, with family, at a holiday, something like that. I thought red wine was okay. I loved it with food. Didn't think much about it. But when I started thinking okay, this wine stuff's pretty cool. I know nothing about it and I want to know more so that I can feel informed when I go out to buy it. So what did I know? I knew a little bit about Cabernet, Chardonnay, Merlot, just a very base level, some bubbly wine, cool. But I found myself when I went to go shopping for wine, I had no idea and I felt uncomfortable. So I wanted to start researching and looking into this wine stuff. And I have no idea what happened. It hit me like a tsunami. I just could not read enough, learn enough, talk about, drink enough wine, go to the wine bar, talk to people. It was helping me meet all these kinds of people that were all obsessed with wine. There was this whole wine world that I had no idea existed, and I was just super stoked to start digging into it. It kind of all started again too. The girl that I was dating, she was drinking a Barbera from the Sierra foothills in California. And I'm like, what is Barbera? It actually had a bear on it, which was a play on words. Barbera is actually an Italian grape, fruity and tart. Highly suggest Barbera if you haven't had that. But that started getting me thinking, I want to know more about wine. So I started digging in and researching. One of the first things I did was just go down to Total Wine & More and talk to the people down there. They had these little pieces of literature all around the store that I picked up for free. I was talking to the wine people. They were making awesome recommendations for me. And I started exploring all different types of wine. One of the first things that I want you to think about when we're talking about wine is old world versus new world. Old world, just very simply, is anything that's not from America. So your old world is your France, obviously, Spain, Italy, Austria, where else? Australia makes Shiraz, which is Syrah. These old world wines, this is where wine started, right? In France. Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne. These are the traditional wine names. Now, what I want you to understand about old world wine is that old world wine is classified by the area that the grapes are grown. So you know that Bordeaux has Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Verdot, Malbec. The way the old world wines are classified is that it doesn't say Cabernet Sauvignon on the label. It says Bordeaux. So you just have to know what grapes are grown in Bordeaux. The way that France does it is literally, it's by law what grapes you can grow in what areas. So Old World will tell you the region that the grapes come from, and you just have to know what grapes are grown in that region. Champagne is actually the name of the region, Champagne, France. Well, we know that Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, some of these other grapes that are used to make champagne, they're not going to be on the bottle. It's just going to say Champagne. So you have to know with the old world style of wines, they're going to classify it differently. Whereas your new world, your American, basically, all your American stuff, it's going to say the grape right on the bottle, Cabernet Sauvignon. This is another Cabernet Sauvignon. If it's Merlot, it's going to say Merlot. If it's Pinot Noir, it's going to say Pinot Noir. American wine lists the grape variety on the bottle. That's how we classify it. So old world versus new world. Your old world wine is going to have more other notes than fruity, earthy, gamey, some of the mineralities, some of the different things. They're a little more challenging wines to get into. They're going to have a lot more unique flavor. Not that the American New World wines can't have unique flavor, but for the most part, American wines are pretty fruit forward. We just like it fruit forward over here. That's kind of the basis of what we do on this side of the world, is a little bit more fruit forward. That is in no way to say New World American wines aren't unique. In fact, the further you climb up the price point, the more unique, the more different flavor notes that you're going to pull out of those. That brings me to my next point. If you're into wine at all, if you're looking to get into wine, you need to familiarize yourself with the term terroir. Terroir is a fancy French word for the region. What does the land give to the wine? So if this wine came from Burgundy or Bordeaux, those wines should show the characteristics of the land, of the region in which they were grown. In fact, they should have so much of that characteristic that you should be able to pick out these sommeliers, these wine experts. They actually just smell the wine, and because of the unique terroir, they're able to identify those wines in a blind taste test. It's really incredible what sommeliers can do, especially those master sommeliers. The way that they can just look at a wine, look at the color, smell it, taste it, and they're able to say, this is a Bordeaux wine, left bank from 2013. It's incredible what these guys can do. There's some movies out that follow the journey of these people applying to be master sommeliers. Check that out. Incredibly entertaining. The stuff that they put these people through to be able to call themselves master sommeliers, absolutely incredible. Like, I think there's a guy who's a doctor who said, literally passing my master sommelier test overall was on par with the time and the effort that it took for me to become a doctor or a lawyer. They take it very, very seriously. It's very secretive. But they're looking for those terroir flavor notes. Now, that terroir aspect also lives in New World. You should be able to maybe tell once you get into it, what's the terroir of Napa Valley versus Paso Robles or something a little farther south in California. What is the difference between a Cabernet grapes that are grown in Napa Valley as opposed to Cabernet grapes that are grown in Washington State or Oregon, or the Pinot Noir that comes from Carneros in the south part of Napa Valley? Does it have some of that southern Napa Valley terroir, that character, over a Oregon Willamette Valley Pinot Noir? And can you start to pick those two flavors apart? That's when you really start nerding out on wine stuff. So start looking at the difference between Old World and New World wine. If you're starting to get into wine, if you're new into wine, I would highly recommend starting in the New World. Get yourself some California stuff. It's a little bit more fruit forward. It's a little bit more approachable, a little bit more drinkable. Not to say there's not some great stuff from some of these other countries, but they're a little bit more unique. They're a little bit more challenging when you're tasting. So if you're new to wine, definitely go for some of that New World stuff. Get yourself some bright, sunny California fruit forward stuff. All right, my friends, we're just scratching the surface of wine knowledge here. I know I will have another wine episode coming up, but let's continue to dig in and get into some of this wine stuff. In my binge thinking episode, I want to talk about what are they doing when you see wine people swirling their wine, smelling their wine. Well, swirling does two things, very simply. Swirling aerates the wine. Wine, once it opens up to oxygen, it starts to really open up. It starts to be a little bit more drinkable. So when you're swirling, you see wine drinkers swirling their glass, all they're doing is opening up their glass to a little bit of oxygen, exposing that wine to oxygen, helping to round it out a little bit, soften the edges, make it a little bit more palatable. So the swirling brings the oxygen in. The other thing that swirling does is bring all those odor compounds, the nose, you're mixing it up and you're bringing it right to the top of the glass. So you swirl and then you smell. That's the other thing I want to talk about. I usually put all of my wine, I put it in a decanter. This is a Riedel apple decanter. I put this in here because, again, this is going to get more of the wine's surface area exposed to oxygen, which is just going to mellow it out, like I said. So this is just mellowing it out every time you put it in a decanter. So there's a little bit of science, there's a little bit of reason. We're not just swirling our wine to look pretentious. There's a reason for it. Decant your wine. All wines can be decanted with maybe, you may not want to decant your bubblies. The bubbles are going to come off a lot faster with that, although they can still probably benefit from a little decanting, take some of that tinge out. So you want to do that. What else are we looking for? Oh, you hear everybody talk about the legs coming down. What does that mean? Honestly, it doesn't mean as much as people think it means. The legs really have more to do with the residual sugar that's left over in wine than anything else. It doesn't really tell you that much. You get a lot more a sense of what a glass of wine is going to be like by swirling, sniffing, and tasting. Now, we talked about glassware. In the whiskey episode, glassware matters. You actually have a different wine experience when you go for a little higher price or a little higher quality piece of glassware. This is Riedel. Again, I love Riedel stuff. It's a little bit expensive, but this is crystal. And the way that the wine lip is shaped, it's nice and thin. Feel your wine glasses at home right now. If they're nice and thin, those are a little higher quality wine glass. If they're a little bit more rounded, they're just kind of dumping that wine into your mouth. It's all about how the wine is exposed to your palate. The glassware that you actually use is important. Let's talk about something else as you're getting into the wine. I want to talk about acid and tannins. People confuse tannins. They say, this wine's really dry. It's making my mouth dry. That's tannin. Tannins come from the skin of the grapes. That's what gives you that little bit of dry mouth sensation. People get confused about this all the time because actually dry in wine describes something else. Dry means not sweet. So if you're saying, oh man, this is really making my mouth like, it's dry, it's actually not correct. It's tannic. You're experiencing tannins. So that's one thing that people do when they drink wine. They say this is let's have a taste of this and see where the tannins are at. I would say this is a low tannin wine. It's got a little bit of that drying effect, but it's way less tannic than I've had. So that's tannins. Acid. The other thing is acid. Acid is kind of that makes you scrunch up your face. I want to say sour, but maybe sour is not the exact right word. It's acid. Acid is what helps cut kind of some of the fruit. Acid is what helps it if it's a little bit sweet on the front end of the palate, but it backs it up with a nice bit of acid on the back end, then you can handle that sweetness. Let's taste the acid in this. This one a real low acidity. Not much acidity in this Cabernet. I mean, a very little bit. Acidity helps with food as well, which we'll get to in the Pairs 2 segment. But you want to start getting an idea of the wine's tannins, the wine's acidity level, whether it's sweet or dry or off dry, like mildly sweet. You know, as I'm sitting here talking through all this stuff, you get the sense of understanding why people describe wine people as wine nerds, because there's so much stuff to nerd out on. There's so much little intricacies, which was part of the fun. Learning about all this stuff that you can think about while you're drinking it. Where does it come from? What's it taste like? What's it smell like? What vintage? We haven't even talked about vintages. Vintages, obviously, you grow grapes over the year, and then you bottle them up for that vintage. Well, this year was a good year. This year was a bad year. This year had a lot of rain, i.e. California this year, getting dumped on. How's that going to affect this vintage of wine for next year? Different vintages. This vintage might cost you, this is a Bordeaux vintage, Chateau Lafite Rothschild from 1997, and this one's like $3,000 bottle of wine, where this vintage, the grapes didn't grow, it was a dry year, it weren't as good. Same bottle of wine, same producer, same grapes, different vintage, totally different experience. So pay attention to the vintage as well. We'll get into specific serving temperatures because that's another thing that can really affect your wine experience, is the temperature at which it's served. Your red wine's about 65 to 67 degrees. Your white wine, depending, you can go about 45, 50 degrees. Your bubbly wine, you can go even lower than that on your temperature. One thing that I've heard that I actually agree with is We drink our red wines too warm and our white wines too cold. Our red wines, what I like to do, I keep it in my wine fridge at right around 65 or so, which I just pulled these wines out, and they feel cool to the touch. They do not feel like they've been in the refrigerator, but they do feel cool to the touch, cooler than room temperature. So a lot of people recommend if you have your red wine just sitting on your counter, if it's not in a wine fridge or something like that, I recommend you pop it in your refrigerator for about 25 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, give it a nice little chill. That's going to help that red wine to kind of like come back down to earth a little bit. The last thing you want to do is drink your red wine too warm. It's going to be flabby. That's a wine term. It's flabby. It's just kind of like too warm. There's not much acidity. It's just kind of like you could guzzle it, which you do not want to do. You want a little bit of coolness on your red wine. In fact, when they say room temperature or cellar temperature, they actually mean like the cellars from the old days, like go down into the cellar where it's noticeably cooler. That's about the temperature that your red wine should be served. Now, why would we not want our white wines as cold? Well, if you really cool something off, you're really clamping down the flavors. You're kind of tamping it down. You want your white wines to be cool, but you want them to start warming up a little bit enough so that they can open up a little bit and you can get that whole experience of the white wine. Your bubbly. I throw pretty much, if I'm going to drink bubbly, I'm going to throw it in the refrigerator. I'm going to let it be there, overnight or whatever. So it's nice and cool on your bubbly. However, what I love to do with bubbly and pretty much all wine, always err on the side of too cool. If you get your bubbly too cool, your white too cool, your red too cool, pour it in your glass and let it come up to temp as you drink it. I think that's a really great way to experience your wine throughout the process at different temperature levels. As it kind of comes up to the temp that you want it, you really get a full experience of that wine. So err on the side of cool and let it warm up in your glass. That brought me to another point. There's a reason wine glasses have stems. There's a reason that we hold them down by the stem. It's not a pretentious thing. You don't want to hold your wine glass with your hand like that because then your body heat is going to transfer into the glass. It's going to warm your wine up prematurely. You do not want to do that with any wine. You want to hold it by the stem so that it gradually comes up to temperature. So that's why wine glasses have stems. You'll see those little tumbler wine glasses. They're like all the rage a few years ago. That's cool. Most people are drinking trash grocery store wine anyways. I'm not a wine snob or anything, but the tumblers are fine if you're just knocking them back with the girls or the guys or whatever. But if you're really wanting to experience a wine, hold it by the stem so you don't transfer your body heat into the wine. Now, if you're anything like me, maybe you're already into wine, maybe you're just getting started. Like I said, when I started learning about wine, I'm not really sure what happened. It took over my brain. I just wanted to read about wine literally every night, talk about wine, drink wine, meet new people with wine. So I went out and got myself a number of different books. This is one of the best ones, Karen McNeil, A Wine Bible. This almost has too much information. This has so much good information. I haven't really cracked and read this whole thing. I kind of use it as a piece of reference, but get yourself a wine book. Kevin Zraly's Window on the World Complete Wine Course. That would be a really great wine book to start with. That one a little bit more on the beginner level than this. But I would highly suggest getting your hands, if you're like me at all, on some of these wine books. Go to YouTube. YouTube has a ton of stuff about wine. I want to talk about one of the wine apps that I use to do my research when I'm looking at wine. It's called Vivino. I have used this app probably more than any other app when it comes to wine, whiskey, whatever. I use this app when I'm shopping, when I'm researching. You can type in the wine name. It'll bring up reviews, price points. It's got a million wines. You can even just take a picture of the wine label and it'll find it in its database. When you're going to the store, if you don't know what you're doing like I did when I was starting out, I was just looking up all these different wines in Vivino. It's a free app and it was giving me a world of information. I use this still all the time today when I'm finding out about wines, looking for them, searching them, wondering if it's a great price point. I would highly recommend the Vivino app. It is free. Check it out. It's got a ton of stuff. It is going to help you on your wine journey. Let's talk briefly about my drink of the week. It is a Wente Southern Hills Cabernet Sauvignon from the Livermore Valley 2019 vintage. This one you can find, I call these grocery store wines. You can find the Justin in the grocery store as well. This is going to be on the top shelf. But there are grocery store wines that you can pretty much find all over the place, and most of them aren't that great. They'll get the job done, but they're not that great. The majority of the wines in the grocery store, mediocre. Unless you know what to look for. There are a few that you can find in there that are really good. This Wente at the grocery store, really good. I'm a huge fan of J. Lohr. Most of the J. Lohr bottles in your grocery store, really, really good. Better than most of the other grocery store stuff. Bogle, B-O-G-L-E. You can find Bogle, Cabernet Zinfandel, Pinot Noir. They have a Chardonnay. Bogle you can pick up for like $9.99, $10.99, $11.99 for some of the Bogle stuff. You can't beat it. For the QPR, quality to price point ratio that we talk about on Boozin on the Budget all the time, Bogle is a great place to start. You're going to find it pretty much in every grocery store. The price is right. I'm not sure exactly how they sell their wine at such low prices because it stands up at some of the more mid-level or higher priced wines as well. So Bogle, highly recommended. But yep, tonight I'm drinking a little Cabernet Sauvignon, a nice hearty grape. A lot of flavor in there. You want to drink a Cabernet Sauvignon with your steaks, your red sauce, your pasta, anything that's nice and hearty. You may not want to drink your Cabernet Sauvignon with a piece of chicken or fish or white sauce that goes in your pasta. It's got a balls de fuerte. So I just also happen to have this Justin. This one, a really popular one. What I want to do though now is talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is what I call dusty hunting. When I started getting into wine, I started learning and looking all over the place. I would run into bottles like this. This is a Justin 2009 Cabernet Sauvignon that I probably got in 2018, 2019, something like that, because somebody bought this Justin Cabernet Sauvignon 2009, set it on their shelf, put a price point of like $12.99 on it, and then there it sat in their climate-controlled, temperature-controlled store. That's important. If your wine gets too hot, it's ruined. But I found this sitting on the shelf, a 2009, and they slapped a price on there. This stuff's way more. This one here is a good $25 or $30 bottle of wine. I found a 2009 vintage. If they've kept the climate right, if it hasn't been too hot, or the temperatures aren't fluctuating crazily, that will do it. Too hot, too cold, too hot, too cold, that'll screw your wine up as well. But I found this dusty bottle of wine at like $12.99 sitting on the shelf. That's a score. This wine has value. This is 2009. It's been sitting there aging. That's the other thing. There's so much stuff to talk about with wine. I feel like I'm forgetting it, but wine gets better as it ages. Particular wine, if it's made well, if the grapes are made to age, if it's stored correctly, it will just get better. It will just smooth out. It will round out, kind of like what it does when we oxygenate it. If it ages well, it becomes more valuable. So this wine has value. Also, what's really cool about this wine is this was the last year, 2009 was the last year where the original wine producers for Justin produced this wine before they sold it off to Diageo or Pernod Ricard or one of these major producers, which we may talk about in the next episode of Wine. A lot of our beloved Napa Valley producers got bought out by these huge beverage conglomerates, which it is what it is. It's still grown in Napa. It's still coming from the same fields, the same terroir, but now it's owned by, one of these huge beverage conglomerates. It's either good or bad. I don't know who you talk to. I love to go for some of the, just like the whiskey, I like that craft, that boutique, that smaller producer, the person who is out there, the winemakers out there actually picking the grapes, tending the fields, doing all that stuff. Personally, I like those stories a little bit more. I won't sit here and knock the major conglomerates either because they are making fine beverages as well. But that's something that happened, which is why this bottle, I haven't cracked it yet. The 2009 was the last year before they sold to a major conglomerate. So I may open these side by side with some people and see, what we can tell between the vintages. an '09 and a 2019. So there's 10 years difference on these vintages. So again, just so much wine stuff to nerd out with. Maybe I'll open this one on camera for the next time that we talk about wine. Let me finish my point. So what I was saying is, if you are out shopping for wine, you're not really going to see it in your Total Wine. Some of your bigger liquor stores and stuff like that, the merchandise is moving too quickly. But if you're going to some of your smaller boutique stores, or even just your random gas stations, sometimes they have these old bottles sitting around. If you see something with some age on it, you see something that you know is a little bit, they priced it, 6 years ago, and they haven't taken the time to update their price, then you know you can get a steal on these bottles. I call it dusty hunting. They're sitting on the shelves collecting dust. Go look for that stuff. Pay attention. You can not only do that with wine, you can do that with whiskey, tequila, all kinds of stuff, because if you're looking out there, you're not only looking for the prices that haven't changed, but you're looking for the stuff that maybe people have started buying up rapidly. Suffice it to say, this was a score. I picked up, an '09 Cabernet at $12.99 that somebody forgot on a shelf somewhere. Look for that stuff. It's like Easter eggs. You can find these Easter egg wine bottles and whiskey bottles and stuff like that. All right, let's move along to my section, pairs with. And if there ever was a beverage to pair with food, it is wine. Wine and food go together like wine and food. I've said it in previous episodes, but if you have a good pairing, it makes the wine taste better and the food taste better. Just in simple terms, you want to pair your thicker, more robust wines with your thicker, more robust foods. Your red wines with some of your red sauce, your steak, your lasagna, that heavy, your beef stew. You want to pair a nice heavy red wine with that. Now let's say you're getting a salad and a piece of fish, piece of salmon or something. Well, you might want to go with a white wine, Chenin Blanc, or even a champagne. Champagne pairs incredibly well with food. That's something people miss all the time. Your bubbly wines are very good to go with food. I just want to encourage each and every one of you, go out, grab you something, spend a little time on the internet, pull up your phone, research whatever you're cooking that night, Asian food, pizza, barbecue ribs. What pairs well with this? What pairs well with barbecue ribs, barbecue pulled pork? Your Zinfandel is going to pair well with that. Take a few minutes, find out what pairs well with your meal, which wine. Go out. You will thank me. You will have an experience with both your food and your wine that you'll never forget. There's a reason people talk about this at length. There's a reason people always eat cheese while they're drinking wine. Cheese is a great way to kind of refresh your palate, cut through some of the acid in the wine. What else? The charcuterie boards. Charcuterie boards are all the rage. There's a reason you have all these nuts, fruits, salami, pepperoni, cheese, crackers, all this different stuff. You're nibbling and you're sipping, and it's just enhancing your experience. Boy, you think you know your wine until you taste it with some of these foods that pair well with it, and then you're just blown away. So do a little bit of research on that. We could go into pairing. It's a whole art. It's a whole science. There's all kinds of stuff. Heavier food, heavier wine, lighter food, lighter wine. Do it. Do it! You won't be sorry. Pair it up, man. It's half the fun. I know that I'm going to think of 100 things that I didn't talk about on this wine episode, because there's 100,000, a million things about wine. I only just scratched the surface. Get into it. This is a journey that's well worth it. Again, you're drinking your wine with your meals. You're learning it. I met so many good people when I started exploring wine. It's such a social beverage. Just go out and enjoy it and learn. The more you learn, the more you will appreciate it, the better and more confident you will feel when you're going to buy it, and the more you're just going to enjoy it. There's a million different wine types. Learn the grapes, learn the areas, old world versus new world. You're going to find stuff you like, stuff you don't like, stuff that's going to challenge your palate. It's tough to start in the grocery store. Man, I hate to sound like this, but there's not a ton of good wine in the grocery store. It's hit or miss. The higher up the shelf goes, the higher up the price. Unfortunately, the better off that you're probably going to find a little bit better wine experience. But do your research. You will find that stuff. I'd highly recommend you going to a boutique wine shop, or even just Total Wine, and go out and talk to these people. You can probably see my passion about wine in this episode. And when you go out and you talk to the people in the boutique wine shop or the winery or Total Wine, you will find people that have this same passion. And they'll want to talk to you about wine, and they'll want to tell you about their favorite wine. And so it's an incredibly fun world to get into. So go get into the wine world, talk to people, explore different grapes, explore different regions, pair it with your food, and get on the fast track to exploring wine. Thank you guys so much for joining me for the wine episode here on Boozin' on a Budget on Titan TV. We'll see you guys next time.